Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for AIAA Los Angeles section online town hall meeting. Today we have a wonderful, very exciting webinar, a wonderful topic about a wonderful project, and we have two distinguished speakers that will give you the briefing and talk about this exciting project and new development. But before that, some logistics for folks online. We will do this event till 12:45 p.m. Pacific time because sorry for that. We have a regional student conference going on right now, so we have to kind of end it around that time. But we should have plenty of time, for presentation and conversation, Q&A. So please give the speaker some time to finish their presentation. You are welcome to type your question in Q&A and in chat. And during the Q&A session at the end, we'll give you the mic access. If you click raise hand or indicate in chat, the speaker will do the best to answer your question. So for the speakers, the first speaker is Jess, Mr. Jess Bounable. He is the president and chief CTO of the New Frontier Aerospace, NFA. He has been involved, with this wonderful project DCX in early stage, and he has great knowledge about this. He will tell you the great story. But not only that, he has a great background and lots of experience. He's developing the high-speed point-to-point aircraft that can fly to the edge of space in every 2-hour flight to everywhere. And also he's involved with many defense and military space projects, including, X-33, X-34 after the DCX-XA, many experience for reusable and also hypersonics. He will tell you a lot of great story. And both of speakers today, they are our AIAA, wonderful AIAA member. Jess is associate fellow. Nino is our great, wonderful educator associate. And Nino is engineering instructor. Mr. Nino Polizzi is an instructor at Samueli Academy here in Los Angeles, Santa Ana area. Santa Ana. And he was a CEO and founder for the Rocket Science Tutors, RST, and is a nonprofit or volunteer program. And he's been doing a lot of great projects, including KC-10, and he was also given the special service citation by AIAA for his efforts for STEM education, and he also published Igniting STEM Interest in Middle School. That's great, contribution and acknowledgement. So I don't want to take too much time, from the speaker, and you will learn more from their wonderful presentation and self-introduction. So here you are. So all yours, Jess and Nino. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, let me just say a few words of introduction. So I was a lot younger back then, and we were flying the DCX. I was a government Air Force program manager out of the Strategic Defense Initiative, where we contracted for and built the vehicle with McDonnell Douglas. And I also wanted to add that Pete Conrad, the third man to walk on the moon, was, as he put it to me, this whole DCX project kind of rang his bell. And we couldn't afford to have him on the program, but somehow he twisted a bunch of arms out there at McDonnell Douglas, and suddenly he was on our program full time. So he did a lot of work for us, and he was our chief of everything. He was the guy pushing the reason we were building this. So the vehicle was a demonstrator for single stage to orbit, but let me qualify that a little bit. It was an Iron Bird. It wasn't going anywhere near orbit. But what it demonstrated the aircraft-like operability features that we felt you needed for a follow-on single-stage to orbit. The real single-stage to orbit required a suite of advanced technologies back then. Have Region, National Aerospace Prime Program, all of those would have come in, and you'd have gone with a carbon composite type solution with CMC coverage, something like that. And it would have closed, and it closed back then, and it would close today if you really went off and dug into the engineering details. So that for those of you out there who want to beat SpaceX in the future, or or Bezos or others, there is an opportunity to build a single-stage orbit vehicle at some point in the future that proves the way to end up with a really low-cost system that can put payloads in orbit. So that's me. Nino, I'd like to turn this over to you, and now you talk about who you are, and then I'll give my presentation.
All right. Again, my name is Nino Polizzi. I spent 30 years in aerospace before becoming a high school teacher, where I'm in my 13th year here. One of the reasons I'm doing this is working with both high school students and a lot of college students. It's become painfully obvious that most students these days know very little, if anything at all, about space history. That includes the Apollo program and, more close to me, the DCX. So one of the reasons I'm doing this is to kind of get the word out there, to educate the next generation on what can be done if you've really got the get up and go to do it. We see a lot of things today where things have been delayed and all kinds of news in the space industry. But DCX really kind of broke the mold and accomplished many things that still haven't been duplicated to this day. So my hope is that I can open some eyes here, particularly with the under 40 crowd. Thank you.
Great. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to give a little bit of background history on what led up to DCX and why we flew it the way we did, and how we demonstrated the rotation maneuver that Nino will talk more about 26 years before SpaceX duplicated it on Starship. And then I'm going to turn it over to Nino, and he's going to dig real deep on DCX itself and what we actually did during the project. And then I'm going to come back, if we have time, and talk a little bit about New Frontier Aerospace, the current venture I'm in. Similar technologies, but flying very different profiles. And the objective here is not going to orbit. It's going from point A to point B at extreme speeds, but using a lot of the same technologies. So if I could, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And I'm going to show mode. So hopefully y'all can see that. So I'm kind of putting this under my own LLC nomenclature as opposed to under any kind of corporate things, because it's a lot of history here. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the past and just touch on the future in this 14 chart segment. So first of all, this idea of hypersonic access to space and global reach, which is the other thing that falls out of access to space, is not new. The Air Force has been interested in this for a long time. Strategic Air Command, Statement of Need, Air Force Space Command, Mission Need Statement, and all kinds of requirements documents over the years that came out. The problem, of course, is that when you create requirements documents in the DoD, it doesn't necessarily mean there's funding. And so nothing ever really got funded other than a whole stretch of various X vehicles and technology programs that you see on the chart here. So, when you go back to these types of vehicles, you go all the way back to the German Sanger concept in World War II. A lot of the early X aircraft, X1, X2, X15, X24 rocket plane program were very relevant to the kinds of things we're doing. Those were all done in the 50s and 60s. Boost glide reentry vehicles, Swerve, a host of others, all leading up to DCX that flew in the 1993 to 1996 timeframe out of White Sands Missile Range. And then since then, we have continued to mature a lot of these technologies for many years. So my point is that a lot of this history that the Air Force pushed for many years is now finally being picked up by emerging commercial entrepreneurs. And I know that because I was at DARPA at the time. Elon, SpaceX, was doing their Falcon 9, and he was thinking about going reusable. And he called me up and said, I've decided to go a vertical takeoff and landing solution. Can you send me your DCX data? So I sent him 6 gigabytes of DCX data, most of it just videos, but a lot of test data as well. And they did a really good job mining it. I'm not sure how much the data helped them. The fact that you could fly a vehicle with aircraft-like operability, shaped in our case like a cone, but in his case like a cylinder. A lot of good reasons for why he went that way. Makes it make a lot of sense for that class of vehicle. And they did a really good job mining the data and actually doing a lot better job than we probably would have done in the government had we done the follow-on vehicle. So what has changed since 1993 to 6 when we were flying that? Well, there's a whole bunch of commercial folks that have come in, and I call the early ones the barnstormers because they all flew into the side of barns and ended up basically going bankrupt, Chapter 7, Chapter 11. But there's a lot of them that are successful now. And SpaceX is obviously, with their Starship concept and with their Falcon 9 concept, is the most successful of all. There's though, a lot of other new entries into this vertical takeoff and landing mode. In fact, most of the folks with serious money are doing vertical takeoff and landing. Stoke Space, Terran, Blue Origin, Relativity. All of them have major amounts of money, and they are building and flying and will be flying vehicles. Most of them are using LOX, liquid natural gas. We used LOX hydrogen when we were doing DCX because we were trying to do single stage to orbit, but they both can be made to work. And then the other thing on this chart is, there's a lot of threats out there. There's a lot of people building things. That upper right corner chart is a WZ-8. That is a rocket-powered airdrop vehicle that can do ISR anywhere in the South China Sea area, even if all satellites are gone. They can sit there and collect ISR and make sure nobody comes any closer than Guam. So very interesting technologies that are being introduced across a broad segment of the world. That is enabling for some of the missions for this class of vehicle. So this was the National Aerospace Plane, and it was started in 1986 timeframe, ran through the early to mid 90s, and it was a single stage orbit demonstrator. It was trying to make a ramjet or a scramjet be able to go to orbit with a composite vehicle and structure, and it had a lot of potential advantages if you could make it work. I mean, it improves your average ISP to orbit by around 50%. That's pretty good. But the problem with it was there was a lot of design challenges. So your engines were really heavy, like 10 times heavier or more than a typical rocket engine. You're using active cooling over much of the surface in order to stay low in the atmosphere and drive through it. Very complex airframe, propulsion integration challenges at those kinds of velocities. You got a lot of extra drag because you're staying down to the atmosphere in order to capture enough air. So that's driving your drag and your delta V required to go to orbit significantly. Propellant density, hydrogen's only 4.4 pounds per cubic foot. And we got a lot of hydrogen stories out of DCX. It is great for rocket scientists. It's not the propellant that I would choose for a lot of other applications. It leaks through everything. We got stories on that too. Leaking through solid steel or aluminum walls, for example. And then finally, heavy flight controls are needed because you're driving at a really high dynamic pressure. So a lot of issues that drive the size and complexity of the vehicle way up with this type of propulsion mode. So there was another set of vehicles that were being looked at. These were the all-rocket vehicles. And General Dynamics had looked at one, a little like Stoke Space today, a vertical takeoff and landing. And then there was a Boeing vehicle called RAS-V on the upper right. Rockwell had a concept that was a little like a shuttle, but took off vertically, landed horizontally. And then McDonnell Douglas had the vertical takeoff and landing, come back, nose entry, and land, kind of a conical design. And the reason to go with a cone, it gives you better cross range, so a little more flexibility when you're coming home, as opposed to something like Starship. But there's pros and cons, and it's really mission dependent as which way you really want to go. we were really, although we were a single stage to orbit demonstrator back in that era, we were not, we were a little bit agnostic because we really were demonstrating the operability characteristics and advocating a more capable vehicle that would fly and prove the technology. And then you can always make the decision of single stage or two stage at some point in the future. So a little more detail on those concepts. Over on that, they were called HAV region. At the time, they were classified, long since declassified. But the contractors came back with estimates on what it would cost to operate these things over 20 years with about 50 flight per year flight rate. And you can see, not too much above what Starship is projecting today. $100 to $261 a pound on the HAV region side, all rocket, hot integral structures. And then we updated that in the early 90s, and you can see what they came in. A little more expensive, but the McDonnell Douglas version, pretty close to what Starship goal of $92 a pound is today. So Starship can get their vehicle to work, and they can really make it fully reusable. And they haven't gotten to the point where they're going to start the full envelope expansion program yet. They're pretty close to the kind of numbers we were coming up with 20 years ago. So a little more detail on the team. It was a little more than a vehicle. There was a vehicle over on the left there, but there was also a flight operations control center there. And both Tom Ingersoll, who was our deputy flight manager, and the guy whose back you see is Pete Conrad, third guy to walk on the moon, and just a great person to have on the team, and a great leader who helped us make this all possible and pull it all together. And then finally, you had the facilities. We had to pour concrete out there in the middle of White Sands Space Harbor, and that's where we landed. A little bit of other hardware, but I think we spent less than $500,000 on the program on permanent fixtures. So the intent was to demonstrate operability, the ability to operate out of almost anywhere with this class of vehicle in the future. And we went from contract in 1993 to flight 24 months later. So very unusual in the aerospace world to be able to do this, but it was an X vehicle. And it was intentionally that. And there were a lot of politics that are interesting as well, but we'll try to avoid those. Okay, so what's happened since then? I got to tell you, man, I love this picture in the upper left. We were struggling to make composite technologies. The Lockheed Martin Skunk Works completely failed at building a composite tankage for their X-33 concept, which they won. They had no clue how to do it. These two little girls are lifting a 8-foot by 4-foot composite tank called blended hybrid laminate. It's been tested with liquid hydrogen and oxygen. It's been tested with liquid natural gas. It's been tested with liquid oxygen. It is amazingly lightweight, just amazingly lightweight. And you can see the two little girls are lifting it up by themselves. The other key technology I wanted to point out is the move to liquid natural gas rockets. Liquid natural gas is 3 to 5 times cheaper than jet fuel, least of all rocket fuel. And so it's a very lightweight engine. Thrust to weight is around 170 to 180 to 1. So very lightweight compared to the thrust that's coming out of it. You kind of see that 2019 generation engine all the way up to the 2024 generation engine. It's maturing very, very fast. There were some other operability and hardware technologies that were demonstrated either by HAV region or the XS1 program at DARPA and a number of other places where I was involved. And, also lightweight tanks and structures, extremely lightweight rocket engines, revolutionary additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing is changing the game on the propulsion side and on the airframe side. And there's many new generations of advanced electronics, computation, and software that have happened since then. So as you move to extensive reusable flight and testing with aircraft like operability and cost, that's the next barrier we got to break. We need X-planes or we need demonstrators that go and prove the operability potential of these new technologies. So the next chart is kind of what happened after DCX. Okay, so we flew this in the 93 to 96 timeframe. And you can kind of see the first gen barnstormers that I mentioned in the upper panel here. And NASA had a bunch of X-planes. They were going to take over from DCX and go build something. But they kind of failed because they went down this path of a lifting body that looks a little like a flying iron. And the structural loads were monstrous, and the engine was very, very heavy, and they couldn't build the composite tanks, and it wasn't stable on reentry. If you ever seen a rerun of the old $6 million man with Lee Majors, comes down and the vehicle flips and rolls, that's the kind of stability characteristics you get out of lifting bodies. So you have to be careful there when you coming back with a lifting body that's going to land horizontally. Okay, I call them the first generation barnstormers because they all flew into barns, they all failed. But then around 2000, along came SpaceX and Blue Origin with lots of money. And Virgin Galactic Stratolaunch to a lesser extent as well. And I call those the second gen billionaires. And now in the 2020s, I call them the third gen investors. And so you got people coming along really looking at not just single stage, not just orbital flight vehicles, not single stage, but two-stage orbital vehicles, but also looking at point-to-point air transportation for a whole range of different applications. So I like to call those the third gen investors, people really coming in with money and expecting to make money. So a little bit of a trade on the old NASP class vehicles with their heavy, all those negative things I talked to you about earlier. And they're both good approaches, and but the technology for those air-breathing vehicles is not there yet. And as you know, the Starship, it's flying today. So when you compare, and if you're going to do a system assessment of this and decide which way you're going to go, you need to understand the technology implications of these different types of propulsion modes and how they filter into the vehicles and how they impact your weight, performance, schedule, all of that. Down at the bottom, that rocket equation there in the middle, that's the only equation you need to build rocket vehicles. That's it. Now, there's a whole bunch of other subsidiary engineering things, but that's the governing equation. And specific impulse flows into that, drag flows into it indirectly through the delta V. The bulk density of the propellants has a big impact on how those masses all close. So all of those are important factors that you need to consider, and they're often very counterintuitive trades in the rocket versus air breathing. But I do want to point out, probably we did a study when I was at AFRL, and our conclusion was with the rocket vehicles and the hypersonic air breathing, they're 80% common technologies. The differences are in the air breathing engines and in the extremes of the structural concepts to handle the much higher heat loads that the air breathing systems that have to drive through the atmosphere are able to do. And again, we're talking vehicles that fly to orbit in this trade, but about 80% commonality. So I can't tell you this without kind of giving you a quick statement of where Starship's at. So you've seen right now we're back in 2010, shortly after I left DARPA and shortly before I came back to DARPA, the cost of access to space was roughly $10,000 a pound, and that was driven by the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program. And then 10 years later, what you see is a little more than 10 years. You see Falcon 9 has lowered the cost of launch by an order of magnitude, literally. So, around $1,000 to $2,000 a pound to orbit with a Falcon 9 reusable system. And then finally, if Starship meets its goals of $200 a kilogram or $92 a pound to orbit, that's going to be a dramatic reduction in the cost of access to space. Another order of magnitude that could happen in the next 5 or 6 years and is likely to have a huge impact on the space economy and the global economy in the future. However, I do want to comment that, check 6 for the vertical takeoff and landing competitors. Blue Origin, Stoke Space, Relativity Space, and Rocket Lab are all building vertical takeoff and landing LOX LNG powered vehicles. A couple of them are using LOX hydrogen on the second stage, your classic two-stage orbit optimized solution, which you don't need. LOX LNG works just fine. But anyway, that's kind of where they're going, and the kind of cost reductions that have been made to date. So there's another way to fly these vehicles, and that you can do point to point. And Starship talks about it, taking off from point A and landing halfway around the world in 40 to 60 minutes. But there's other ways to fly similar profiles. We've been doing boost glide flight demonstrations for decades on the weapons side of things, but you could do this with a larger vehicle that's designed to carry people or cargo. There's yet another mode that we'll talk about when I talk about New Frontier Aerospace, boost cruise glide. It's a great way to get payload from point A to point B, 100% rocket powered. And then you can go down a little lower and a little slower and end up with a turbojet Ram Scram flight system that a number of companies are pursuing at some level. The risks are a little higher, but it's certainly possible. But, the fundamental issue is that Starship cost goal of under $100 per pound to LEO, you're starting to blend worldwide air travel with access to space costs. And all of this becomes possible in the future. So there's a few companies that are looking at point to point. We'll come back to this when I talk about New Frontier Aerospace. And that would include, SpaceX, obviously, Venus. China has a company that's looking at a vertical takeoff and landing solution. Boom, Hermes, Venus, and New Frontier Aerospace that I'll talk more about. And then Destinus is another one. I believe they're out of Switzerland, and there's others as well. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. And what I'm going to do is turn this over to Nino, and Nino's going to deep dive into DCX and what we did on DCX that is enabling all of these futures that I just talked to you about. Nino, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jess. Again, my name's Nino Polizzi. I had the honor of working DCX, the original DCX there back in '93. Spent my time out in the desert with folks. I'm looking for my full screen. Button here. Where did it go? All right. You see full screen? Are we good? Sorry.
No, it's not full.
Now full
It's
screen.
not full screen.
Oh, here. There we go. All right. So again, the driver for me on this is educating the next generation. A lot was done, and it seems to me that the current generation knows very little, if anything, about it. So what I'm trying to do here, this pitch is, it's not really going to be a deep dive. I've tried to skim across the surface. There was so much. But the thread here that I'd like to get across is it was the innovation that occurred on DCX. And there were many, many innovations. I want to highlight some of the main ones here and show how they all came together to produce the effects, as I said earlier, that were pretty spectacular and haven't yet been duplicated. So what I'm going to do is give you a very brief program overview. Then I'm going to hit some of the main systems and subsystems there under vehicle. Excuse me. A short word about the fabrication and test that occurred right here in Huntington Beach, California. Talk a little bit about flight ops, and then what I think the legacy of DCX actually is. So program overview, and some of this might be repetitive a little bit, but we were awarded at McDonnell Douglas what was then called Space Systems Company, and we were located again in Huntington Beach, California, in August 1991 by the SDO. Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, which is now called Missile Defense Agency. And our task was to develop a 1/3 scale, and again, emphasizing it was suborbital, but it was to be reusable and it wanted to demonstrate, again, key points: rapid reusability, a 3 to 7 day turnaround, autonomous vertical takeoff, vertical landing, subsonic maneuverability. Again, this was not intended to go to orbit. A minimal flight crew ops, and Jess alluded earlier that it was flown with 3 people, one of them being Pete Conrad. Needed to be highly cost effective, and it was heavily schedule driven, which drove some of the things that you'll see here, including the use of off the shelf, primarily avionics. So as I said, it was designed and built right here at home, Huntington Beach. The static fire, after we did some initial testing, we couldn't static fire it at the plant probably for obvious reasons. So the vehicle was shipped out to what's called NASA WSTF, NASA White Sands Test Facility, which is out there next door to White Sands Missile Range. And a number of static firings were done. I'll show you a picture of that in a few minutes. And after we were convinced that it was ready to go, it was moved a short distance over to the White Sands Missile Range, where all of its flights, all 12 flights, were eventually conducted. So one of the key points of DCX, it was a very incremental approach. We didn't hit it one day and say, hey, we're done, let's go do all these things. We used the mantra, build a little, test a little. So we started off with a basic vertical liftoff, a little hovering, a little landing, and then started adding in some in-flight vehicle dynamics, the maneuvering, and then the rapid turnaround. And that was done on the initial contract under DoD. And then after 8 flights, the program was transferred over to NASA, and there were a number of technological upgrades, and the vehicle was renamed the DCX-A, or Delta Clipper Graham. And it flew an additional 4 flights afterwards. So a total of 12 flights, 8 as DCX, 4 as DCX-A. So some quick facts about the vehicle. It's about 42 foot high, 13 foot base. You can see its gross weight and its empty weight having a mass fraction around that 50%. 4 Pratt & Whitney RL-10s, more on that in a moment, each providing about 13,500 pounds of thrust at low altitude. Again, it was a LOX hydrogen vehicle. Interesting enough, it was about a $60 million program, and as said earlier, time to flight was 24 months, which is still pretty spectacular. Sorry.
Sorry. Try to get your phone over there, right?
So I'm going to jump through here now. What I've tried to do is highlight some of the main innovations or main points about each one of these technologies as we go through there in the red box. So again, we had an RL-10A. RL-10s have been around for quite a while. Cryogenic engines, they could be restarted. They were used as early as the Saturn program. There were some mods made to it, like truncating the nozzle and allowing some deeper throttling. But basically, using the RL-10, it was a mature design. So with some mods, it was ready to go, rather than trying to develop a new engine from scratch, which obviously could take a lot of time. We had a total of 42 firings, excuse me, with a total 8,400 seconds runtime without refurbishing, which in and of itself is pretty amazing. The subsystem propulsion, we had some RCS thrusters. And those were GOX hydrogen thrusters. You can see them. We had 4 of those in the corners, which they weren't used initially. That was, again, kind of a build a little, test a little process. They got added in early or later in the flight. The way the vehicle was maneuvered initially was with engine gimbling, and then the RCS was added later on. But eventually, we also added differential throttling, and I think towards the end there, by flight 8, we had 60% of its maneuverability was done with differential throttling, and then the 40% was with gimbals, and then the RCS was added even later than that. Significant about this was the free venting chill down of the hydrogen, or the LH2, their hydrogen. You can see the clouds, and then the addition of the GOX hydrogen RCS thrusters. The ground support system, as Jess alluded to this a little bit earlier, you can see it was pretty portable. It was pretty basic. Again, what we're trying to do out there, we're trying to store and operate cryogenic fuel out in the middle of the desert, where usually after 9 o'clock, the temperature was it exceeded 100 degrees. It was a pretty hot environment. But again, the vehicle was put out there. We put the LOX and hydrogen at opposite ends, and we were able to fuel that vehicle, as I'll show you here, from our crew, from our remote crew station. But everything out there was stored. You can see the high pressure helium. We had helium, nitrogen, and then the fuels as well, the LOX hydrogen. Aerodynamically speaking, the vehicle looked a little funny. Again, it had that conical kind of square shape, which allowed a lot of nose first with a high L to D reentry. We had flat sides, which allowed some more of that cross-range capability and that unique shape done for VTVL. Again, you can see the shape, the flaps, the strakes. Another significant point here is the lift here was controlled by the engines rather than wings. And that allowed a much tighter control of the total flight time, which also reduced risk. Avionics wise, because there was a lot of off-the-shelf stuff. You could see there the route, the nav system, the Excel and the rate gyros were all taken right off of existing aircraft. And that saved a lot of time, allowing that time then to be put into the software development, which was also a significant component of the success of this program. But by using off-the-shelf, again, the engine was all pretty much off the shelf. These avionics were off the shelf. It saved an enormous amount of time as well as money. We used to call this in some cases the Home Depot rocket because we literally did at some points needed a fastener or two, whatever, that we drove 2 hours out to get it from Home Depot. The aeroshell was another very innovative thing. That being, it was a total composite aerostructure. That aeroshell was built by Burt Rutan and the guys over at Scaled Composites. It pushed a lot of envelope there that it hadn't been done before. So that the landing loads actually were all pushed through, the load path was all through the aeroshell itself. And then you'll see on the next slide, all the thrust loads were passed through the core structure. The core structure was comprised of the thrust structure, which you can see a little bit down there on the left, kind of crowded out by the RL-10s. And then you can see on the right, the tank structure. So those tanks got the hydrogen and the LOX, and then the avionics rack up here in the top. And that was the core structure, again, as the thrust loads were passed on through that. So we actually had two load-bearing structures, if you will, the aeroshell and the core structure itself, which again was new. It pushed the envelope. Here's a couple of shots of fabrication at the plant. Very exciting times, kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity. What I'd like to highlight there is the boombox on the bottom there is the engineers were never very far from the shop. And I think that went a long way to cutting costs, cutting time, bringing back Pete Conrad again. Conrad was the kind of guy, he was a vice president at the time, yet he sat out with us. I shared a cube wall with Pete Conrad as pretty much just a standard engineer. Pete Conrad liked to get dirty and he liked to stay with the action, and he kind of inspired everybody else that you had to really stay close to your hardware and not stay in the ivory tower. The buildings were right next door to each other, but as you can see, the engineers spent a lot of time right down there with their hardware, working with manufacturing to make sure that it went as smoothly as possible. I think that's a big lesson for today as well. Close proximity to your hardware gets you a lot of benefit. All right, so after we built the vehicle, ran through all the testing we could, vehicle was moved over to the NASA WISTA facility, where it was bolted down to an existing test frame. I believe that frame was used for the lunar module back in the Apollo era. So it's some mods. Our bird was bolted down on there. You see, it looks very nice. You'll notice that they have some incredibly beautiful decals on there. And the guys, I remember watching the guys mount those decals on there for a week and everything. And then on our first flight, we had an accumulation of hydrogen around the base. So when those engines lit off, it ignited that whole thing into a huge helium cloud, and it singed off all the decals. So that's why in later flights, you don't see the pretty decals anymore. If you see the decals on there, you know it's first static fire. So after a number of static fires, we'd run the vehicle through its entire flight profile till we were satisfied that it was ready to go. It was then trucked over next door to White Sands Missile Range, where it made its all of its 12 flights. You can see it standing on its launch pad there. You can see it's pretty austere out there. Again, going back to Jess's comment, not much infrastructure was added. We had a portable shelter there that you see on the right, a little garage to hold it in there. I would like to add the environment there was very challenging, not just the temperature, but they call it white sand. It's actually a powder, and it gets into everything. It goes through seals, it goes through your clothes, it's miserable. Yeah, it's a form of gypsum. Also, white sands was one of the highest lightning incident strikes on the planet. So we had to come up with we had some catenaries across, just basically some wires strung up over the vehicle to protect it from lightning. We also had a number of whiteouts where there are very strong winds. You could see them off in the distance, this big white wall of flying gypsum coming at you, at which time you'd secure everything and try to get out of town. So the environment alone was a pretty challenging component of this whole program. Okay, here's our thing on flight operations. The flights were all controlled out of what we call the FOCC, Flight Ops Control Center. It was a mobile trailer that allowed us to operate independently of the range. And that saved us a lot of schedule time, a lot of just cost. It enforced that smaller crew size. Again, you can see the 3 crew. There's Pete Conrad, front and center. Again, highlighting third man to walk the moon. It's hard to overstate the influence Pete Conrad had on the crew. Most of us, being my age at that time, had grown up during the space race. The original Apollo astronauts were all heroes to us. And to work with a guy like that who didn't know the meaning of the word "you can't do this" or "stop and slow down," I think it inspired the whole team. And I think that was a big component of DCX's success. I'd like to acknowledge also that we do have Nancy Conrad in the audience with us today. So Nancy, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Nina.
Also in the flight operations here, a lot of very innovative software went on. You can see on the left, the GUI, that allowed the 3-person crew to basically load the vehicle remotely with the click of a mouse. So that DCX was literally pre-flighted and flown with a mouse. And there was a lot of software development there. There was a lot of flight testing was done right on the flight computer. And the flight crew could actually simulate using the flight computer before the flight. Again, saving an enormous amount of time and cost as well. Again, each of these charts could be a presentation in and of itself. I'm just trying to skim across the top and hit the main highlights. Oh my goodness, here's one here. We didn't get much time to rest, but somebody caught me here with a camera, and we did periodically. There were some downtimes, and we had to take advantage of that. It was hard to sleep in 105-degree heat, though. I won't go through this in detail. You can look at it, but what's highlighted here is you can see the first flight. Our first flight on the 18th of August, 93, was only 60 seconds long. I'll show you a quick video of that coming up. But you can see the time duration of the flight were not that great. And you can also see they progressed. We started slow durations, low altitude, just to try it out, just to check it out, make sure we weren't doing any damage. As you'll see here in the video, I think we were all absolutely stunned when that thing rose. It's 150 feet, and then as you'll see, completed its flight. It was pretty amazing. I think we were all shocked to see it work. Let me show you a very, very short video. I think that will do more than I can say. Here we go.
In New Mexico today, a rocket launch lasted only about a minute, but it made history just the same. The Delta Clipper experimental took off just like any other rocket today at the White Sands Missile Range. But when the McDonnell Douglas DCX reached 150 feet, it stopped climbing, just the way it was supposed to. The lightweight rocket then moved about 350 feet sideways, seemingly defying gravity before landing. And that's the historic part. It's the first rocket ever to land nose up. The DCX is a one-third size prototype of a single-stage rocket that McDonnell Douglas hopes will help cut costs by eliminating the need for multiple stages to overcome gravity and put payloads in orbit.
So I never get tired of seeing that video. Let me bring back full screen here 1 second. There we go.
Hey, Nino, while you're saying that, going to orbit with these class of vehicle, you're only maybe 6 minutes of engine on time. So it's we really weren't that short of with the right lightweight vehicle of putting something in orbit.
Yes. Here's I believe this is the second flight ironically enough, on 9/11. You can see it again, not very high, went about 6 times higher. Again, just to get to look at the translation, make sure engines operated as expected, et cetera. Build a little, test a little kind of mentality. Another new thing was, being a rocket guy earlier on, once that thing launched, you were done. It was gone. This thing came back, so we had to go get it. We had to retrieve it, and we had to develop post-flight operations. Things like, switching back over to ground power, draining out the fuel, and ironically, heating the engines. Yes, I was surprised too. But those were cryogenic engines, and when it landed and we crawled inside there, they were covered with ice. So we literally had to put heaters on there, while it was 106 degrees outside, heaters to warm up those engines and dry out all the water on them. It's kind of interesting. You can see on the right, you can see the place where the decals used to be. So we gave up trying to put pretty decals on there. This is when, yes, I did have dark hair at one time. And I usually show this to my students to show them that, actually, I did have dark hair. Over here on the left was the mobile van, and that towed a generator, how we used to, switch over to ground power. And then we also had to drain the tanks after flight. So again, this was a whole nother thing, getting back to the comment about aircraft-like operations. So when an airliner comes in, it has to be fueled, the toilets have to be drained, and the food has to go back on, and all of that. So this is kind of that same kind of mentality that permeated the entire program. Here again, post-flight servicing. You just kind of another picture. Here's the mobile generator, the venting, and that whole process. Then the vehicle would have to be moved back to the launch stand. And as you'll see here in a few minutes, we did do a 26-hour back-to-back flight. And Pete was ready to Pete was pushing for 3 times in a day, which I think we could have done eventually. This was Jess Sponable there on the left. I think you were a major at this time. Yes, Jess?
Yeah, and I had brown hair and I was skinny. Amazing.
Yeah. So I just like to highlight again because this kind of brings to light a lot of things about the program. On Flight 5, there was some vented hydrogen that detonated right upon ignition, and it caused an explosion there that you can see. That explosion pushed against the aeroshell with quite a force, and it busted out about a 4-foot by 15-foot section, which you see on the right. Now that in and of itself isn't so amazing. What's amazing is the vehicle flew, and there is a video, you can find it on YouTube, where as it's flying, pieces of the aeroshell are falling off. From an instrumentation standpoint, it wasn't noticeable. And then the guys in the control center realized on camera that parts of the vehicle were falling, and they went into the abort mode, and the vehicle made a perfect landing. Vehicle was repaired and flew again. So again, it kind of goes to the heart of this, not just aircraft-like operations, but a very robust vehicle. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking, as we said. After the 8th flight, we switched ownership from DoD over to NASA. And there were a number of technology upgrades. And this is just to highlight them. Most of them were driven to lower the weight. So you can see there, we changed out the tanks, went from an aluminum to an aluminum lithium, The aluminum tank there went from aluminum to composite, and the LH2 tank also went from aluminum to composite. So all that lighter weight then provided extra capability, extra flight time, extra maneuverability, et cetera, et cetera. I believe the aluminum lithium tank was provided by the Russians. Isn't that right, Jess?
It was, yeah.
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 So again, these are the 4 flights, the last 4 flights. Again, this would be flight 9, 10, 11, and 12, or 1, 2, 3, 4 as DCX-A.
Yeah,
So-
the landing gear was provided by the Germans. So we
landing
were
gear
a
was-
multinational demonstration.
Exactly. So just a quick chart on operability. I'm not going to read all this to you, but again, I just wanted to highlight this, that we really took aircraft-like operability to heart. We had people from McAir working on this, McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. We also had people from Douglas Aircraft right up the road from us who built airliners to try to help us with that philosophy, because it did take some effort, because we were all rocket guys and we were pretty much used to throwing our stuff away. There on the bottom, you can see the flight computer was replaced. Software was loaded and verified inside of 65 minutes on the day of flight at the pad, out in that environment, which was no small feat. Also note here that we had no destruct capability on there. We could not blow the vehicle up. We had an abort capability, but we could not destroy it in flight.
But we did have a button we could push, and it would lock the engines in mode. And the reason why the White Sands Test Facility said you don't want to fragment a vehicle like that, because it'll come down on everyone underneath it. What you want to do is just lock the engines in a sideways mode as much as you can gimbal them, and it'll tumble out of the sky, and then you only have one little spot you got to worry about.
All right. And you're out in the middle of nowhere anyway. So,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, again, accomplishments, not going to read this chart to you, but I just want to highlight from an operations standpoint, many records were broken, again, including, as I said earlier, a 26-hour turnaround. The landing location was retargeted in 4 hours, including the software update and verification. All right, it's not an easy task. And again, this was in 1993. This was almost 35 years ago, back in the Stone Ages. Performance-wise, you could see differential throttling. RCS is the only means of vehicle control. Blended differential propulsion that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So there were a lot of accomplishments there. Got another page. Again, won't read them to you, but as I mentioned, that inadvertent gas detonation and then the autonomous recovery control. We've landed vertically on concrete, a grid, a trench, and a non-prepared and prepared gypsum out there. Mentioned a couple of things about propulsion. Again, the aluminum lithium, lightweight composite tank, gaseous oxygen, GOX hydrogen RCS in flight, and as I said a little bit earlier, that free vetting of the LH2 and LOX tanks. And here we are, the end, Flight 12. I want to dispel any notions when you see that smoking Hulk there that flight was a failure. It actually performed magnificently and it made a perfect landing. The problem was that one of the pneumatic lines for landing gear number 2 wasn't connected, so it only deployed 3 gear. But it made a perfect landing on 3 gear, and after that, Newton took over, vehicle toppled over, and the tanks exploded, and that's kind of what's left. But the flight itself was not a failure. The landing was perfect. The remains now can be seen there at the New Mexico Museum of Space out in Alamogordo. You can go see it. We had always hoped to get a display together and kind of do a recreation and whatever. That kind of never materialized. But if anybody's out there wants to write a large check for that, we're willing to talk. So again, the DCX legacy, I'd just like to close out here that it did prove, it set out doing what it meant to do. You could do reliable, robust, reusable, vertical takeoff, vertical landing, LOX hydrogen powered, all of which were first, and that was possible. And that paved the way, as Jess has kind of showed us, for lots of other things. We call them kind of the children of DCX, much of which is still starting to gather momentum as we speak. And my main point again was there was intense innovation across all the systems that enabled all of those records, if you will, all that innovation, all that accomplishment in a relatively short period of time. And some of it was technological and some of it was human as well. We talked about guys like Pete Conrad. We talked about just the esprit de corps of being able to do something like this. We had a little bit less oversight, a little bit less on the paperwork that allowed us to kind of just cut to the chase and get that down. If you are interested, you can go look up there's a lot of info on YouTube. You can just punch in DCX or Delta Clipper, DCX Rocket. You can find all kinds of video. And one more chart here. You can also, there's a couple of books out there. One is by Andrew Butrika, and then there's one by Harry Stein. And then you can find on eBay that we were on the cover of Popular Science here it was back in February of '94. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the one and only Jeff Spano. Thank you,
Thanks. I got to reiterate that, we flew that rotation maneuver in 1995 that Starship did. The difference was Starship came down and did a lot of booms on the ground with massive fireballs over them. We did it one time, and it rotated perfectly, going from a horizontal flight to vertical flight and then coming down and landing. Now, we cheated a little bit. We didn't shut the engines off and turn them back on. Yeah, we were too chicken, but we had the potential to do that with a few mods to the engine. So there were a lot of firsts that were accomplished, and I still believe that we could have done single stage to orbit had we been allowed to go do that. And if you actually look at what Starship's doing, they're using technology which is primitive compared to what exists today. They're using a steel monocoque structure, which we flew on the Atlas in the 1950s. So, there's a lot of advanced technology that you could introduce that would end up with a very capable either single stage or two stage solution in the future. So, go ahead.
Just before you go, we do have Nancy in the audience, and I thought we could just give her, a couple minutes there if she would like to. It looks like she would like to say a few words. So, Nancy, if you'd like to, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, it's great to see you guys. Holy Christmas, a couple of days have gone by. The memories of that magnificent team and the work you guys did and the fun, and it was, Pete used to say, it was the best thing he'd done since going to the moon and this and that. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what about me? I'm just kidding. Anyway, and I remember we would all sit around in the living room in our house in Las Cruces, and you guys would dream about the future. And from the DCX, Pete created 4 companies working on next generation rockets and how we were going to go to space as travel from California to Italy in 45 minutes in Leo. That would have been pretty cool. And no TSA lines, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a joy to listen to you and to see the passion that you still have. And thank you, Nina, for teaching. We do the same thing with the Conrad Challenge and next generation of scientists and innovators and entrepreneurs. And Jess, good to see you as well. I think the 3 of us should get on a chat and see how we can get into some good trouble going forward. But thank you for letting me say hello to everybody. And it's just such a joy to feel the passion and the fun that was at White Sands Misarrangement. By the way, I now live in Santa Fe, so
you're close.
Up the road, I guess it is. Yeah. Anyway, so let's have a sidebar with the 3 of us one of these days when you guys have some time and see what kind of good trouble we can get into.
Absolutely.
Especially in this New Mexico, which could really use your help in next gen.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to now switch, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the future. if I can, that's not it.
I don't mind speaking.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is the Q&A from the last session. I'm going to talk a little bit about, some of those vehicle concepts. And can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Go full screen.
And can
Go
you
full
see?
screen. Go full screen.
Well, before I do that, I'd like to show the vehicle that I'm going to talk about here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
So, what you can do is, if you're talking about rocket power, and especially when you're using additive manufacturing to build 80% of the rocket nowadays, it gives you a lot of options on how you can build things that are a little different. So instead of the conical shape that you see with DCX, just go to a rocket powered vehicle like this that's shaped a little more like a lifting body, but never goes anywhere near orbit, never flies beyond Mach 10. And heating is a function of velocity cubed. So you end up with something that flies relatively low temperature profiles and goes very, very fast from point A to point B. Now, it won't do what Starship is doing in point-to-point flight anywhere in the world in 40 or 50 minutes, but, it'll basically do 2 hours to anywhere in the world. So let me talk. I'm going to talk more about that and whatever else is in this brief. I'll tell you in a minute. But I will go to full screen mode before I do that, if I can. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. All right, full screen mode. So talking about New Frontier Aerospace. Now, New Frontier Aerospace was incorporated in 2020, late 2020, and we have been steadily and slowly building a lot of hardware. And there's three of us, Bill Bruner, myself, and David Gregory. David's kind of the tech guru who builds all the hardware. And we've got a very small team that is building a number of different applications that we're going to talk about. But I just want to emphasize that propellant manifold in the upper left, 100% additively manufactured. The tanks next to it, we don't additively manufacture those because I can buy them here in Dayton for $2,500 a piece, dirt cheap aluminum tanks. Then you see them with cryogenic propellant. You see us testing out in a remote area. And you see the engine coming together down at the bottom. And then you see it being installed in the test cell on the far right, the turbo pumps being tested next to it. You see us doing testing of the tanks through burst testing to make sure that they're going to survive. And yeah, indeed, these tanks didn't burst until we got to 325 PSI, which is way above what we think. And yet they're flight weight tankage. We do have a little UAV we fly that flies a similar profile and gives us a similar aerodynamics associated with the vertical rotation and landing maneuver. And now we're testing the full-scale engine. It's together, and we got a number of different nozzles we put on it, and we're in the middle of a qual test program on that. So a lot of hardware is where we focus this company. So on the far left, you see the Mjolnir engine, and Mjolnir is named after Thor's hammer. A lot of power in that engine, but it's small. It's only this engine with the big nozzle on it is about 3 feet tall. And with a small sea level nozzle on it, it's about 2 feet tall. And that engine would then go on an orbital transfer vehicle for moving things around in space, or alternatively, just like DCX, we can put it into a UAV-shaped vehicle that can support point-to-point flight. And so the little 3-engine vehicle there is a pretty small vehicle, 5,000 pounds gross weight, tiny. And then the medium size, you go to 7 engines, and then you go to a little bit improved engine. And then once you get over on the far right to what we call intercontinental, that goes 8,000 miles, basically anywhere airplanes go. Now all of a sudden you need a new engine and a much bigger airframe for that. But those are our three near-term products: is the little UAVs, the orbital transfer vehicle, and the engine itself that's in the middle of qual testing. So let me talk a little bit about the engine. This is the Molnir engine, and it's 3D printed, 80% of it. It's LOX, liquid natural gas, full flow stage combustion. Its vacuum thrust is around 2,500 pounds with the short nozzle on it, the sea level test nozzle, and also the same nozzle we'd use on the UAVs. And the qual testing, it says here 60%. Actually, it's over 80% right now. So we're getting up there, and we're getting to very long duration burns, and we're getting ready to have to go to some longer run tanks so we can test it for the entire mission duration. But this engine with that kind of thrust level, it only weighs 25 pounds. It's a very low unit and operating cost. In fact, we sell these for $300,000, which is a fraction of what you'd pay for an RL-10 today, which would be many, many millions. It is deep throttle, reliable, safe, and it really is perfectly sized for both flight in space, point A to point B, but also for a UAV where you want to do hypersonic flight. We're going to talk more about how we do that in a minute. So the Molnir engine is scaled to the same thrust. If you were to take that engine, that full flow stage combustion cycle, which is the same cycle that's used by the Raptor engine on Starship, only we're less than 1% of the thrust of Raptor. But if you scale that thrust to the same thrust as the GE90, you'd have 100 times fewer parts in that turbofan engine. You'd be 1/20th the weight. You'd be a quarter the size. And the turbine inlet temperatures, you'd be under half of what the GE90 is. So tell me I can't build an engine that has the same operability characteristics as today's jet engines. The answer is you can. We just haven't yet. So this is the first demonstration of an engine that is going to go there, and we're going to test it to show it. So this is the incremental steps that we would see. We've got a little UAV that I mentioned earlier that we're flying right now. It's a kind of call it a control systems test bed with a similar shape. You can see the bigger vehicle that we're building right now, and this is a one-engine vehicle that will take off and hover, and so that'll come together hopefully sometime this year and fly. That's the plan. And then over on the right, you can see the vehicle coming together with the internal tankage. So that a lot of the same technologies that we're using on that, the propellant choices, the autogenous pressurization system, the accumulator system that fuels the autogenous pressurization. Autogenous pressurization means we're using liquid natural gas to pressurize the natural gas tank, and you're using gaseous oxygen to pressurize the oxygen tank. You really don't want to switch those two connectors, okay? You want to make sure that you're not mixing natural gas and oxygen or vice versa. But anyway, those technologies all feed both the orbital transfer vehicle on orbit and some follow-on vehicle where we go to 3-engine and we go to what's called conformal tankage. Notice how the tankage on the inside, it kind of conforms to the outer shell of the vehicle. And we're going to need to do that to kind of get to the full capability. But we call that UAV with the conformal tankage our minimum viable product, where we actually have capability coming out the far end. And we're going to talk about that. So this is what we call Bifrost, and Bifrost is we really like this Norwegian, Viking stuff. Bifrost is the bridge to the gods, the bridge to the heavens in the Norwegian legends. And so you can kind of see here, this is Bifrost. We do have a contract to turn it into a prototype, less avionics, so it'll test the entire propulsion and mission cycle. It'll move hundreds of pounds from LEO to GEO, or a smaller amount if you're going to a closer orbit like a Starlink orbit. It's pump fed, full flow stage combustion, LOX LNG. You do use the gaseous oxygen, natural gas for pressurization, but we can also grab that gaseous oxygen and natural gas for the reaction control system, for auxiliary power units, and it's electronically started on the gas-gas system, which if you think about it, that means I can be at any attitude, I can be in space, I'm starting on gas. Gas goes everywhere. So I can start it on gas, and then once it's moving, the liquid will flow in, and you will end up with the full LOX LNG combustion process. If you add a refrigeration system to it, turns out LOX LNG is really easy to refrigerate compared to, say, liquid hydrogen. It gives you pretty much indefinite life on orbit, and it'll fit on a small launch vehicle, or it'll fit on a Falcon 9 or a Vulcan or those other systems. So it's a low-cost access to all Earth orbits and cislunar space. So here's how we fly. We take off, we fly really high. You know, you're talking 150,000 feet. The only thing that flies at 150,000 feet are are UFOs. Okay, there's nothing up there. Balloons don't even go that high. But that's where a rocket-powered point-to-point system wants to optimize. And the shape of the vehicle will be a little different than what you see here. It'll be a Wave Rider class configuration, but it will be a delta wing, a little longer, a little slender than what you see here. And so with the 3-engine vehicle, it goes about 2,000 miles, statute miles. And if you go to the 7-engine vehicle, over 3,000. And if you go to the big UAV, you're talking about a much larger payload, or significantly larger payload, and it'll go 4,000 miles. So beyond that, and that's how it flies. It flies up, pitches over, flies level on an engine throttle down, and then as you get near the end, it comes down and lands. So like airplanes, I don't have to design this thing like I do with rockets, where it has to reach orbit. I can accept a shorter range with less fuel, and I can continue to push that out as the gross weight goes up with more and more propellant on board. So one last point to reminder, the big vehicle on the right of the chart I showed you earlier, that was the intercontinental version of this. That one is 2 hours to everywhere. And just to kind of highlight that, so it comes across graphically for you, if we were operating out of White Sands, you can see the red circle there, and that's the kind of range you would get with the smaller vehicle. And this is recovered at the end with a vertical landing. Or the 7-engine version, you see the red circle around it, even farther, and with the slightly higher chamber pressure that we put on that engine, we end up with even greater ranges. And of course, once you go to the intercontinental, you basically can go almost anywhere in the world, very few exceptions. So a little bit to the advantages of this type of flight. You know, I call it twice the range, less than half the cost. It's really about a tenth the cost of what you do with a typical turbojet, ramjet, scramjet type solution. And we do have a CRADA with the Air Force Institute of Technology that's ongoing a contract where, you know, they do some work and we do some work, and we don't necessarily exchange money. But, you know, what you find is that this class of vehicle with LOX LNG, you're basically 10 times faster than today's jets at half the size. Your manufacturing cost is almost 10 times less. The engines, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, the airframe, because you have a much lower dry weight with rockets, just intrinsic to how we build them and have for decades. And then finally, and this is more from the DCX experience, we think you can get to aircraft-like recurring operations cost. And we've modeled it, and we think we can get there. You know, the fuel itself is 3 to 5 times cheaper based on Henry Hub prices for buying liquid natural gas and liquid oxygen off of Wall Street. Safe. You know, the Molnier engine is very low temperature, very low RPMs, very low chamber pressure. All of that gives us confidence that that engine is going to have the operability characteristics that we need for extensive use. And it was designed to be that way. It's comfortable. So we never receive more than 2 Gs on launch. In fact, we only lose about 10% of our range if we drop that down to 1.5. A Learjet going down the runway does 1.5 Gs, or a half a G horizontal. So, and when we're cruising, you know, potentially we're in a shirt sleeve environment, never see more than 1 G. very low sonic boom because you're at such a high altitude, 100,000 times less than Concorde. So we're going from, over 100 dBA that Concorde saw to a little over 50 dB on the ground. So it's kind of like the dishwasher coming on for 2 seconds or 3 seconds in the other room. And I showed you this chart earlier, but again, that just amazes me every time I look at it. 2019 to 24, look how that Raptor engine evolved. And you'll see the same thing. The key, of course, is money. You got to have an engineering team and serious money to do this extrapolation. We're not there yet at NFA. We're building and testing hardware, and we hope at some point to have enough investor interest so we can leapfrog into this and really make all of this happen in a hurry. How would you flight test a vehicle? So we kind of got into that with DCX discussion, okay? So, but here's some flight simulations. And the yellow one, we can take this vehicle off and we can fly around the runway and we can come back and land and never go supersonic. So that's a great way to kind of prove it. Now, the first step would be the vertical up, vertical down that we did with DCX. But then you go into this subsonic mode, and then eventually you go into a supersonic mode, the red lines, where you're flying to maybe Mach 3, bring it back and land it the same way. And then at some point, you go from over a hypersonic test corridor. So since DCX happened, I spent a lot of time in the government. And we did a lot of looking at various hypersonic test corridors. The best hypersonic test corridor in the world is taking off out of Midland, Texas, or Spaceport America, or White Sands Missile Range, and flying on a great circle pattern. You go pretty much right over Edwards Air Force Base, so you can do incremental shorter range flights. And then you go over Vandenberg a little bit further, and then you're going not too far off of PMRF, which is in Hawaii, the Pacific Missile Range. And you can do a little bit of cross-range maneuver and come down on that. And then eventually you end up at Kwajalein. And for a vertical takeoff and landing system, hey, I can land out there and turn around and fly back. Now, these are bigger vehicles as you go to those extended ranges, but it highlights that, one of the keys, and this is something Starship has not done yet. We did it with DCX, but Starship needs to go into an incremental flight test program where they really push the envelope on the fully reusable system. It's hard to do with the two-stage system. It's much easier to do with a single-stage vehicle. So anyway, that's kind of where we're going and the simulations and what we'd like to be able to get to as we move into the future. So again, hardware-rich progress, a lot of technology. I'm not exactly sure why I put this chart in twice, probably meant to pull it out of the other one. Some recent news, we are working with AFIT. We're over 82% throttle right now, and we do have a contract to build that OTV prototype. So we're, after 5 years, we're defying the odds. We're still alive and still making great progress as we build this technology out. And I am hopeful and confident that at some point we're going to end up with probably the best point-to-point flight system since sliced bread. So a few takeaways. The technology for hypersonic flight exists today, but, pick carefully. If you go build another Ram Scram system, it's just as hard now as it was in the mid-90s, and you may fail. But if you use rockets, and we've been flying rockets at hypersonic speeds in missiles, admittedly, since the 1950s, but much easier to go do. And you got to shape the outside of the vehicle, and you got to fly the right way to do it. These systems are simpler, smaller, and fly further than their air-breathing brethren. And they require balancing, specific impulse, lift over drag with wave rider type configuration, and propellant mass fraction. There's a lot of common technology for space access and hypersonic aircraft, tech and aircraft-like operability, significant mission overlap as well. And NFA is poised to grow and fly. So we've got the OTV ground test going on in 26 and 27. We hope to fly it either in late 2027 or 2028 in orbit. We're looking for an opportunity to do that. And we're going to do the hover flights of the UAV later this year, and hopefully get the opportunity to build a minimum viable product, the 3-engine UAV that gives us a 2,000-mile range, for which there's a number of applications. Final thought I just want to leave with you from the New York Times, October 9th, 1903 edition. A flying machine which will really fly might be evolved by the combined and continuous efforts of mathematicians and mechanicians, and from 1 million to 10 million years. Okay, that's conventional wisdom. Ignore it. If you know how to do something, if you got the technical knowledge to go make something happen, then just go do what Orville and Wilbur Wright did when they, on the same day, the October 9th, 1903, they started assembly today of the Wright Flyer. So lots of opportunities in the future. And I still think there's somebody out there that's going to build a single stage to orbit vehicle. It's not going to put, SpaceX out of business, but man, it's going to give them a run for their money. And I'm looking for someone to step up. I'm a little too old for it. Anyway, that's the end of the story. And we'd love to hear questions and answers from, we'd like to provide answers and love to hear questions from y'all.
That's great. Just, Dino, I think there's a question in Q&A by Marty. Marty, do you want to speak out? Mr. McLaughlin, do you want to speak out? Marty, do you want to speak out? Let's see.
Hey, Martin McLaughlin, you on? There he is. Martin, you on?
Okay, I found the mute button. Hey, great presentation, guys. So, I'm a big fan of DCX, and I've worked with you just for, I think it's 25 years now. But I was thinking forward to everything we're doing here is straightforward for cargo, and I was thinking forward to crew, humans on board. I assume it'd be autonomous. You don't want to have to train pilots to do all this stuff. But, if you've got oxidizer and fuel in close proximity, like you have in a rocket, you have an explosive mixture that traditionally, to date, we provide escape systems for because of that hazard. Do you think a system like this would have to have an escape pod like an F-111? Or is there some kind of reliability growth path that could get us to a point where we go, okay, we don't have parachutes on airline passengers. We don't need an escape pod for a suborbital transportation system, with the difference being you do have an explosive mixture on board.
So I'll start and I'll toss it over to Elon or Nino. Sorry, Elon.
Whoa!
Ouch.
Let me use my.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about both solutions. I personally think that if you fly a lot, and we think that you could fly these small vehicles that we're talking about, 5,000-pound gross weight or so, we think you can fly it, multiple times a day or get to that point. And certainly if you look at the history of X-planes, the flight rate grows dramatically over time. And so I don't see any reason why, with a lot of flight experience, why you can't just eventually migrate to a vehicle where I'm not really worried about that. I mean, for one, people worry about mixing these propellants, but, unless you hit the ground at, Mach 1, in which case no one's going to walk away from anything at that velocity, you're not likely to mix these propellants to any significant degree. Even when the Shuttle Challenger action happened, you had less than 1% of the propellant that actually mixed and ignited. It's really hard to get a full ignition detonation with liquids. With solids, they can detonate. The whole thing can go up like a firecracker. But with liquids, very, very hard to do that. So I think that's possible. The other half of that is, yeah, you could come up with some kind of a crew capsule that's recoverable, or the vehicle itself, because the dry weight is quite a bit less, is potentially recoverable. The one thing you do have to be able to do, just like all these rocket-powered vehicles, is you got to be able to fly them, just like we did when we aborted DCX. You got to be able to fly the rockets to burn off the remaining propellants. So, there's a lot of different possible failure modes, as I'm sure you know, Martin, and you'd have to really work your way through all of those and understand the reliability and operability and safety impacts of all of them. Nino?
I don't have much to add other than that just the usual march of technology. What at one point seems absolutely impossible or really hard to do, eventually gets overcome. And we've seen that time and time again in all areas of technology. So I would not be surprised if in whatever 25 or 30 years we've approached the thing where the reliability is such that we don't worry about it. Take today, just with two engine jetliners, going over the sea or the oceans, without a second thought. So I would suspect that eventually that will happen.
Well, the good thing
And
is,
the only thing I would add to his comment is, in this era where technology is evolving at hypersonic speeds, 25 to 30 years might be a great overstatement. I think Nino and I may live to see it.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that there's a market for the cargo, so you can pay for the development. If you had to develop a safe system for people right away, it would be very difficult.
Well, I mean, again, the liquid natural gas at Henry Hub prices and liquid oxygen is 3 to 5 times cheaper than jet fuel. So at least in our extrapolations, when you go, cargo tons per mile, it's actually competitive with subsonic aircraft.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think,
but you got to get to the reliability and safety and all of that really implemented. And there's only one way to do that, and that's with a flight test program.
Well, and recurring operations with cargo vehicles.
Yep.
Okay, thanks a lot, and great presentation, both of you.
Thank you, Marty. So I see Adrian. Adrian, do you have a question? I saw Adrian type something in the chat. So Adrian, do you want to speak out? Oh, maybe it's how about Sam? Sam, I saw you also type. Oh, Steve. Steve, do you want to say something?
You talking about Steve Hazer?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh man, I tell you the stories I was hearing from Jess and Nino are just absolutely fantastic. There were a lot of behind the scene things going on the political side, and G. Harry Stein book has a lot of those things in there that you just kind of got to shake your head. One good example is before you came on board, Jess, I was there before you were in the program office, and we had a number of key, remarkably talented, seasoned veterans like Maxwell Hunter and A.O. Tischler. A.O. Tischler, for anybody who doesn't know, basically ran the Apollo rocket engine program for NASA. And we were talking he and I were talking with Bill Galbatz one time and trying to say before the DCX RFP came out, and one of the things we talked about was we said, how are we going to get an engine going? And Dell said, we used to take those RL-10s and we didn't have a big vacuum chamber. So we truncated those suckers, and that's how we tested them. Why don't we just use a truncated RL-10?
Yep. Yeah, the politics were strange and intense. So
yes, we had to keep our heads below the the NASP folks. I got kicked off the NASP program. I actually was had clearance to get on the NASP program when the SSTO program first got started, and except after I wrote a paper, nothing in life is free and neither is oxygen from the atmosphere. For some reason, my clearance got pulled.
Jeez.
Yeah, well, I spent 3 years in the NAS program, and it was a great program, developed a lot of technologies, but if you're trying to go to space, it's not the right way to do it.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
I have a question for Nino, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hi, Sam Coniglio here. We met, I think, at the 30th anniversary party.
Yes.
Yeah. Long time caller. Well, actually, no, I can't say first time caller. I've been at this for a while. But yeah, I would love to know, are you teaching DCX stories at your school? What kind of program you have? How are you educating the public?
I work at a public charter high school here in Santa Ana called Samueli Academy, and I run a 4-year engineering program in high school, grades 9 through
Wow.
12. So I do have some DCX, as part of my curriculum, but we try to educate them a little bit, a little mechanical, a little electrical, a little civil, whatever, kind of a wide, and we do it in what's known as a PBL environment, which is project-based learning, which is edu-speak for what it basically is the engineering process. So I pretty much teach the engineering process to high schoolers.
Fantastic. That's a great crash course there. I would love to talk to you offline. I'm working on my second book right now on the rise of the commercial space industry. I just did an interview with Charles Chafer and Gary Hudson and talking about all the old guys. You may have heard of those names.
Yeah.
and
Hey,
also
who's old? Who's old here?
those veterans, those pioneers, those heroes that made these things happen. And so we got to educate the new generation of space enthusiasts about what happened before, where we are today, and no, Elon Musk did not invent the space program. Okay?
Absolutely.
You've probably seen this in the classroom with the youngsters. They think that the Elon Musk invented everything. I was like, no.
Exactly. And they don't know who's the only country who's landed human beings on the moon. So yes. So yeah, give me a call, whatever. Happy to talk to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
You've got my email.
Yeah,
I do. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that though that had Pete Conrad survived, his whole concept for how we move ahead is very, very similar to exactly what Elon did. So unfortunately, we lost Pete early, and had that not happened, those companies he started might well have been the companies that are SpaceX today.
Yeah.
I saw Rich type something in Q&A. Rich, do you want to speak out? Rich, you have the microphone.
Hi, this is Rich Kasich. Just I had a question about the NFA proposal and whether landing horizontally might make more sense or would be cheaper or more fuel efficient or even safer. Just wondering your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I ran a program at TARPA called Experimental Spaceplane XS-1, and we named it that intentionally, hoping that there'd be other experimental vehicles that came on after it. Okay, it was a vertical takeoff, horizontal landing, LOX hydrogen vehicle. It used the SSME. We actually demonstrated on the ground with the SSME that it could be operated over mission durations. Full engine thrust, and we could test it 10 times in 10 days, and we did that. So we knew we could build it. Ultimately, Boeing walked away because they were frightened of Elon, and they didn't think that they could do as good. But I would say there were a lot. That's my interpretation. There were, when you look at horizontal landing, it introduces a lot of things that we didn't understand when we did the XS1 program, because we always thought that we knew vertical takeoff is what you want to do with rockets. Horizontal takeoff's really hard to make it work. But vertical landing or horizontal landing, we thought 6 of one, half dozen of the other. What we learned on XS1 is there's a whole bunch of issues from landing gear sizing, from where you locate the landing gear, so the slap down load don't kill you. The slap down loads when that nose comes down are humongous. It oversizes the structure. Everything gets more complex and heavy. Whereas when you're using the vertical takeoff and landing, powered landing, much simpler. Now, what you got to worry about with the vertical takeoff and landing mode is you really got to make sure that engine's going to turn on first time, every time, which is why we're going after a gas ignition cycle at New Frontier Aerospace. But there's a whole lot of testing between now and then. And it's one thing to fly a UAV, it's another thing to put people on it. Somebody mentioned pilots, you'd want this thing autonomous. Well, yeah, true, but it's like Pete Conrad taught me a long time ago. He called himself the flight manager, the man with the golden mouse.
Right. Yeah.
Which for a guy who had a golden arm, that was a big concession. Okay, so he was a test pilot. He was an astronaut. Landed on the moon. So he definitely knew how to fly anything and everything. And for DCX, most of the vehicle is flown autonomously, but you are there and you are able as a pilot to make decisions on abort if you need to, and where you would land and things like that. So you're managing the flight, but no, you're not controlling every elevon and every flap that necessarily moves. And that is pretty much standard in the aerospace world today, even on the aviation side, but more so with these kinds of vehicles.
Yeah, Max Hunter used to say the stick in the rudder man's going to be the computer.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my take on it. Nina, you want to take a cut?
I really don't have. I don't think I can add to that. That's. I think you summed it up pretty well. Again, the technology is marches forward, whether we like it or not, and I think sometimes it surprises us all at how fast it goes. Sometimes it's too fast for some of us or humans in general. But it's going to move, and we got to adapt to it.
Maybe that mission manager could be on the ground, and you wouldn't have to train somebody of the flight crew, which you really want to be paying passengers.
And that works right up until the time you put passengers on it. Passengers kind of want to make sure there's someone at the controls. So
ride trains with it. Well, yeah, you're right, but pilot proficiency is not cheap either.
Can you hear me?
Thomas, yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask a question about infrastructure, because I think that's going to be pretty important. So, um, I'm assuming that, if the rockets become horizontal, then, the ground infrastructure and maybe even, the manufacturing would need an overhaul. So I'm just thinking, like not just horizontal launch vehicles, but also other types of, changes in launch vehicles in general. Like, how do you think an overhaul in infrastructure or production might play out, to make this thing really scalable?
When you say horizontal, I mean, even production wise, I think pretty much these days everything is produced horizontally.
Yeah.
We build deltas and whatever; those were all horizontal production modes.
Yeah.
Can you clarify a little bit what you mean?
Yeah. Sorry. So I was mainly focusing on the launch pads and, right, like air control and such forth. But yeah, so that's what I meant by infrastructure, to accommodate for
Okay.
these new rocket types
So again,
or launch pad type.
DCX we had very little infrastructure. You'll notice we didn't have a launch tower. There wasn't even a launch tower there. What you might see hanging around there was just a tower for some of our catenary for lightning protection. So there was very little infrastructure at all. Conversely, if for a horizontal lander, which I think is what you're alluding to, you would require, basically you have to look at kind of an airport type runway and the like. I think that's what you're talking about. Yes.
Yes,
Jeff, you want
just
to add to that?
scaled.
I think one of the advantages of DCX was from a landing and a takeoff standpoint, there was very little infrastructure. I mean, as you saw towards the end of the program there, we landed on just, unprepared gypsum. So we
Oh.
validated that we could do that, and our launch stand was you could put it on the back of a truck. So if you change that and you were going to a horizontal lander, I think you would incur a lot more infrastructure, and you'd be much more constrained at where you could land. One of the things with DCX was it could land virtually anywhere. That was the thought anyway. You could land it virtually anywhere without an infrastructure being prepared. Jess, you want to add to that?
Not much. I mean, that was one of the big advantages of vertical takeoff and landing. I don't need all those square miles of space for airports. I can operate on a 100-foot pad, and that 100-foot pad is a whole lot cheaper to build and operate. Secondary is I can go straight to where, if I got a meeting at a factory somewhere, I can land at the factory. I don't need to go through, LAX. I can fly direct. So there's a lot of potential advantages to vertical takeoff and landing. Of course, I do have to have a fueling infrastructure, wherever I go. But it's just like DCX. In that case, it was mostly mobile with things we could move around, and it could be
Okay.
more mobile in the future.
Okay. I was just asking that because, I was watching some SpaceX construction going on, and then yeah, they're building, they're overhauling their entire launch pads, and then they're building 5 of those. So I just thought, if you're gonna scale this up, how would that look like? But it's amazing,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's a difference. Okay, so Starship is an 11 million pound vehicle. It is giant. And it's amazing, and I'm a huge fan of it. But what we're talking about, DCX was what 50,000 pounds or 42,000 pounds, whatever it was, and even the follow-on vehicles that we were talking about, we were never thinking about more than 1 million to 1.5 million pounds for a more limited payload capability. But the last time I visited with Elon Musk was over 10 years ago, and first words out of his mouth were, "Jess, I'm going to Mars." And he needs that to go to an 11 million pound vehicle. So there's just differences in what you're trying to do. But if what you're trying to do is build a really low cost launch capability or a really low cost point to point capability, it's not the same thing as what Starship is doing.
All right. Thank you.
One of the ongoing discussions that has continued over many of the years has been the how do you flight manage some of these vehicles within controlled or even uncontrolled airspace. We've had a number of we meaning myself and others have had discussions with the FAA AST on this topic. There have been some white papers written on it as well. I'd love to hear both of your guys' thoughts with regard to that, because your vehicle's coming down, how controlled is it? I mean, how much airspace is going to have to be, restructured, modified, closed, that kind of thing? A lot of those things have come up in the discussions. How do you guys? I mean, I'm sticking a fork in this one here.
Yeah, so let me start with NFA, and then I'll let Nino kind of address it. But so when we take off, we know where all the aircraft are in the local area, okay? And
Right,
there's
right,
not any of those aircraft that are going to catch us. We're
right.
beyond them in instant. I mean, we're already 150,000 feet, a couple minutes after we take off. Now, at 150,000 feet, as I mentioned earlier, there's nothing but UFOs up there.
Right.
Zippo, nothing. If I were to use the same safety criteria that the military uses for UAVs, that the FAA uses for UAVs, then anything on the which is a 1 in a million chance of impacting something on the ground if my vehicle suddenly blows up or something. Hey, I can fly over almost anything, including potentially cities, and not violate that criteria, especially after an extensive flight test program where I understand the reliability and safety limits of the system. So that's really not an issue in the cruise mode when I'm flying at 150,000 feet with UFOs. Now, when I re-enter, now I've got a little more noise and a little bigger sonic boom, and I come back down through that, and I do have to worry about aircraft, but guess what? I know where they are even then, because I've been uploading it, the FAA is watching it, and it really hasn't changed that much because I'm flying so fast from when I took off. So, and I'm in full control. I can maneuver. I can turn to the right. I can turn to the left. I can bank. I can slow down by pitching the angle of attack up. So I got lots of options for how I would fly this and bring it down and land it at a precise location or any alternative location. So the only real issue is right now the FAA is being really conservative with Starship. And so they're using some kind of insane number. They don't mind if you die on the ground from one of these things falling on you. But if it might impact the airplane, they, instead of 10 to the -6, they use like 10 to the -9 or 10 to the -12, some insane number to make sure that you could never possibly impact one of their aircraft in the air. So you got to get rational, and that will happen with experience and understanding. But yeah, I don't understand the FAA criteria that's used today, and I certainly don't understand why you would use that kind of insane criteria in the future. But I will tell you, having worked a lot with range safety over the years and flight safety, it's a unique group, and I love them all. But there's going to be many a battle that happens in the future as we sort all this out. Nino, over to you.
I can't add anything to that. The only mix in would come in is as technology advances, that kind of situation is bound to be addressed. But yeah, Jess, I think you covered that more than adequately.
Okay.
Hey, Jess, you just hit on that the politics of the technology advancement when you talked about that insane number. There are politics going on behind that. You can bet your sweet life as to that number that you're talking about.
The conventional aviation guys are scared shitless right now that they're going to lose market share, and I get that. They will. They will lose some market share.
You say that. But what you really are talking about and have hit on is the ability to have interactive flight management activities. That's one of the keys that we kept running into off and on over the years in this area. So you've hit on that, and we're running into the same thing at Beyond Earth Institute, which is where I currently am working with the politics of reentry as well. Vehicles reentering with commercial payloads from things that are made on orbit and things like that. That's going to ramp up, as you were indicating, very fast in the not too distant future as well.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, if no question, I think we will need to conclude the session here. Sorry for this. But we'll post the recording online. We'll notify everybody about the recording. This has been a wonderful presentation. great discussion, and we'll hopefully have the follow-up event on DCX and further reuse of our project. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you very much again, and enjoy the rest of the day. Truly, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, let's thank the speakers. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks Jess and Nino. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
See you, Nino.
Thanks, Jess. See you.
Yep.
You can.